Oh, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today on uh, this weird time of 11:30, just as everything is wrapping up. But we wanted to bring, I guess, the news hopefully from yesterday to you as quick as possible. So joining me today is Belinda Crosby, another director here, and we're just going to try and run you through some of the issues that are popping up and some of the commentary around the Sydney shutdown, and what builders and contractors in particular need to do to be able to get back on site next week. It's pretty open slather here today, so we've got a Q&A. Any questions that are popped in, we will try and get to them whilst we're on air, but if not, we'll respond to you after that date. So with that introduction, we'll just jump straight into it. So today are a few of these topics, mainly, what has to be done in relation to the restarting of the construction works, what those areas are, and what the works that can be done. Briefly touch on the restricted local government areas or LGAs. Discuss in some detail what the COVID safety plan is and what that means for contractors. We'll briefly touch on what unoccupied sites, unoccupied construction sites, and occupied construction sites are, and then touch on the claims that are that will flow off the back of this, and including both costs and time. And then we've got a Q&A there, but by no means does that mean wait until the end. If you do have a question, I've got the questions open on my second screen, and I'll try and jump into them as they arise. So look, just quickly touching on what's happened in relation to the Greater Sydney region, and that's where we'll be focusing, is on the 17th of July, or almost 2 weeks ago now, the New South Wales Government paused all those non-urgent works on construction sites. However, they did indicate that would only be a 2-week pause, and in great news for the industry, that's at least has been followed through with, and construction has been allowed to reopen from today in some circumstances for some certain works, but in earnest from the 31st of July. Now, that does not mean, however, that it is open slather and returning to works as they were prior to the 17th of July. There are some significant restrictions that are still in place, and some works that that you as contractors will need to be aware of and comply with to ensure that those works can continue and continue to be done in a safe way. So look, the list of the local government areas has obviously increased yesterday to include Georges River, Parramatta, and having a mind blank, and one other local government area. And those restrictions there are obviously greater than in the general Greater Sydney region. So, jumping through here a bit quick. So in relation to where it is restarting, in Greater Sydney, what we're seeing out of the public health orders and the government is that it is being undertaken in 2 ways. The first way is that it's been undertaken and applied to what they're deeming to be occupied sites, and they are to be unoccupied sites. So we're going to run through those in a bit of detail soon. What's important to know is those construction sites still within those restricted areas, however, they do remain closed. What has come out of Infrastructure New South Wales, though, is that as the works have been restarted, there's now the ability to undertake those works on public holidays and Sundays to catch up and make up for lost time. And that's a similar act to what was introduced last year in relation to being able to undertake those works outside of the DA hours that were mandated through those through whatever the DA was that was applicable. So with that, I'll throw over to Belinda to have a chat through the restricted LGAs and what that means for unoccupied and occupied sites.
Thanks, H. As Hamish has said, the list of restricted LGAs has increased. So there are 8 restricted LGAs in New South Wales and in Greater Sydney. They are Blacktown, Canterbury Bankstown, Campbelltown, Cumberland, Fairfield, Liverpool, Parramatta and Georges River. If you're unsure about the boundaries of those areas, there's some good maps available on the New South Wales Government Health website. All construction sites in those restricted areas unfortunately remain closed. All workers from those local government areas are also unable to leave unless they are what's called an authorised worker. And we'll go through that definition in a second. But the important news is those areas still remain completely locked down. Restricted but authorised workers is an important change from this weekend. Authorised workers are allowed to leave those restricted areas. There'll be part of the construction industry that applies to and part that it won't. So they will include workers in transport and manufacturing where you're in a business that's deemed to be critical to the construction supply chain. Now there's some kind of ambiguous information between New South Wales Health and Infrastructure New South Wales at the moment about what exactly that means. And Hamish actually clarified that with Infrastructure New South Wales yesterday. And we're being told that the public health orders will be updated shortly to specify exactly which workers will be authorised to leave those locked down LGAs. But there will be a group of people who are in the nature of they work for manufacturing type businesses that are deemed to be critical to the supply chain. So we'll have more detail about that when those orders are updated. H?
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. There's a question that's popped up here from her, and it's one that we only had on many times, and I don't think we've got an exact answer to it. And it is, what are the rules with picking up materials from a restricted LGA to deliver to a site that's not restricted? So I guess in relation to that circumstance would be, picking it up out of Parramatta and delivering it to a site that was able to operate.
Yeah, and as a practical issue, in all of these cases, it's important to remember that if you're picking it up from a construction site within the restricted LGA, those sites are closed. So as a practical matter, you may not be able to pick up materials, but if there's a business that is still open in the LGA, then you may be able to enter it and pick it up. Just as a practical matter, I would imagine that the amount of businesses that can lawfully stay open and sites that are open at the moment will be limited.
Yeah, in relation to entering the restricted LGAs, that the public health order doesn't require that you do not enter that restricted LGA. However, obviously there is a general overview that please don't go into those restricted LGAs if you can in any way avoid it. In the alternative, particularly in relation to going in and picking up supplies out of the restricted LGAs, transport workers from those businesses that are still operating. So, if your timber is in Parramatta and it needs to be transported, those transport services are still deemed to be authorised workers, and they should be allowed to leave and supply those materials to the construction sites that are operating. And in relation to risk in that scenario, and not only public health risk, but also complying with the public health orders risk, my view, and again, I probably should have said this is general commentary here. This is not actual legal advice. We don't know your exact circumstances. I'd have to say that at the start and say it ongoing. But in my view, in those circumstances, you're better off having the person that is supplying the materials deliver those materials, because they're the ones that can have that COVID safe plan and the COVID safe pathway from doorstep to doorstep in a way that complies with the public health order, and that obligation is then on them. So don't know if you have a different view, Val.
No, I agree with that. And probably the last thing before we leave this slide, just to clarify, the information that we have from Infrastructure New South Wales is that general construction tradespeople, so people who are not deemed to be critical to manufacturing or transport supply chains, those people in the restricted LGAs will still be locked down. Those general tradespeople will still not be able to leave the LGA. Next slide.
Sorry.
You're right.
Cool. Coming along here.
Is this mine, H?
This is you, Val. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so the critical part of construction resuming work, and this is a critical part of the deal that's been negotiated between industry representatives and the government, is that the condition of construction resuming outside the restricted LGAs is new COVID safety plans. So you'll be able to log on and see the detail of those plans on the New South Wales Government website. The one that I'm looking at right now when I'm referring to it is there's a particular page for construction and tradespeople on New South Wales Government website, and there's then a link to construction sites in Greater Sydney with COVID safety plans. On occupied sites, so non-residential sites in Greater Sydney, these plans are mandatory, and we can't stress enough that these plans are quite specific and they are extensive in their requirements. These requirements go beyond, we suspect, what everybody has been operating on until now. And the purpose of the last 2 week shutdown was in fact for the industry to negotiate what would be involved in these plans so that people could resume work, but in a different but safe way. So the considerable requirements address all 4 of these areas: the wellbeing of workers, and that includes assessment of people's health before they come onto site, but also tracking methods and increased ability to track people in the event of a positive COVID test. Physical distancing, which goes well beyond, it does include the 4 square metre rule, but it goes well beyond that 4 square metre rule. So it goes to things like parking for your workers, how many people you can have on site in a particular area at a particular time, and basically the general movement to and from site and on site while you're there. There are new hygiene and cleaning requirements and much more significant record keeping requirements. So
yeah, I think the hygiene one in particular, there was one, and this is relevant to something that's just released literally in the last 10 minutes. Face masks are obviously still required everywhere on those construction sites, and the fines for not wearing them now have risen to $500 from $200. So that's obviously a significant amount of money, and certainly something that should definitely be complied with. One of the things when I had a look at this, Belinda, when I was running through it, was the requirement to daily clean hard surfaces that are used daily, and for those cleaners to be in PPE. So that's a significant requirement in relation to in relation to this COVID safe plan. Things like the examples they've got here are delivery areas, turnstiles, lifts, hoists, printers, plant and machinery, handrails. And this COVID safe plan requires any staff undertaking that clean, and that clean is done daily, to be in protective, personal protective equipment. So it's a big additional cost that is going to be burden chain between the principal, the developer, or the builder.
Yeah, and it's each of those categories struck me as significantly different in terms of cost and the arrangements to comply with them. We don't have time to run through all of them on the website today, so we encourage you to go there yourselves and make sure that you can comply with them for your business. But we particularly wanted to flag that this is a condition of construction resuming in Greater Sydney. So you will have to have completed one of these plans for every single site, a separate plan for every site. You have to register it online before work starts, and you have to have a copy of it available every day. If you can't, this is the big thing to take note of. If you can't comply with these plans, you should not be resuming work on site, and you will be risking heavy fines if you do. So please, it's not something that you can comply with when you're on site. It's quite significant. So have a look at it now if you're planning to resume work on the weekend.
Yeah, great, Belle. I'll head over here to occupied sites, and we'll run through quickly about those and a little bit of the difference between there. Now, there's not a contained definition at this stage, but looking through the legislation and the relevant sites, occupied sites appears to be linked to residential homes, and we can take that as the standard. We discussed one briefly about whether residential homes include apartments and how that's going to work, and simply we don't have an answer to how that will work in the current circumstances, and that may be something that needs to be brought up by to Infrastructure New South Wales or Service New South Wales. So, but look, in relation to occupied sites, there's some clear guidelines that do need to be followed. So this will include, renovations of existing properties, or if you're doing minor maintenance, etc. I think John Barilaro mentioned, installing a new air conditioning system outside of the house, and how you have to still have a COVID safety plan for that, but you still need to comply with these obligations. And some of those key ones are, no matter what you do, if you're able to segregate it between the workers and the homeowners, it is preferable that the homeowners are not there, but they actually can't leave for any reason that is outside of the orders as well. So that's going to be a difficulty. But if you do go to site, you must be aware that in compliance with that COVID safety plan that you really should have, only 2 persons are allowed to be inside the property at any one time, and 5 persons outside the property at any one time. So occupied sites, consider those to be homes where people are already living. They were, for example, you are building a new home, or where you are, there's a townhouse development or something along those lines. So obviously, someone from a restricted local government area cannot come to those sites to undertake trades and work, because they are not an authorised person, and you must be wearing masks both inside and out. Unoccupied sites. So obviously, these are sites such as commercial property, civil infrastructure, major New South Wales government works. We've used this definition as sites where people do not usually reside. But there are significant requirements in relation to restarting construction work on these properties. And Belinda's run through those already. The key one there being the mandatory COVID safety plans. That has a fairly detailed list, looking at it, and it's a drop-down list on the New South Wales website, and we will share these websites with you immediately, or not immediately, but very shortly after this webinar. Working through those, there's some 40 requirements or 40 check boxes that you need to work through and fill out what those things are. So it's a significant piece of work to not only document, but actually plan. You're going to need to be
Can I just add, while we're on unoccupied sites and those safety plans, we should probably also have said that there may be some works that can't go ahead in view of the requirements of those plans, or that have to be significantly modified in terms of how you deliver the works in order to go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, that's a great point. One of the requirements that they've got in the COVID safety plan is that you should be looking at ways to split contractors into zones, and then for each zone to have their own QR checking code. So some sites will just not be able to do that. And so you'll need to work out how you can comply with that 4 square metre requirement that is overarching over any of the access that happens to any occupied or unoccupied sites. Obviously, again, can't be from a restricted local government area, so those tradespersons won't be able to become on site. Interestingly, for commercial premises, so the example that we discussed briefly was if you're say, for example, you're fitting out an office on level 6 of a 10-story building, you would need to have a COVID safety plan, but the occupier of that premises would also need to have a COVID safety plan that complies with this, the construction site plan, and you need to be able to work out how you're going to be able to operate in a COVID safe way. So you need to have that plan, but you need to work out how you're actually going to be able to comply with the requirement of that. And again, must wear face masks inside or out. That's obviously an obligation that is not only for construction sites now. So
there's just a question.
Now
There's just a question that we might tackle straight away. There's just a clarification about what an occupied site is. So just clarifying for Tom, an occupied site is a home, basically. Everything else is a non-occupied site.
Yes.
So schools, shopping centres, hospitals, they are unoccupied sites.
I'm hoping I'm still going through. I've got a little thing up here that says my internet's not great. Lisa's also asked a question here. It's saying, is she clear in understanding that that on an unoccupied site, so for example, a civil site, that a mask is to be worn outside whilst working? And the answer to that is yes. You now have to wear a site inside or out. There are circumstances where it may be impractical I think it's in harsher terms than that, impractical to not wear a mask. But again, have a look at the COVID safety plan website, and it does articulate a few of those issues and how you can comply with the COVID requirements if you cannot wear a mask in certain circumstances.
So in terms of claims that arise from these circumstances, we did a webinar last week that went over the government's approach to claims on government jobs. But just to recap, there's some guidelines on the Infrastructure New South Wales website that parties can claim payment for demobilisation, suspension and remobilisation costs. Those rules apply to all parties in the supply chain for government projects, but you need to refer to the government guidelines for how to submit those claims. So there's a preferred way to submit those claims, and some of those should be separated to comply. In terms of non-government sites, you need to check your contracts and be putting in all of your contract notices, and particularly be looking at things like the legislative requirements clause or statutory authorities clause. This is a new requirement that's been imposed by government while your contract is on foot. So you may have an entitlement to additional time and costs in those circumstances. Anyone who's not sure of their entitlements, obviously reach out and we can help you with that. H, anything further to add on that one?
Yeah, I think just in relation to them, and obviously there's a lot of people that are working on New South Wales government sites and non-New South Wales government sites, and it's New South Wales government agency sites as well. The key thing that they articulate in those guidelines is that there's a requirement to be collaborative, and there's also a requirement to have an open book if you are going to claim any of these funds. So if you're on the New South Wales government site, or you think you're on a New South Wales government site, so this does apply all the way down the supply chain, so subcontractors, etc. Check with your head contractor, check with the principal of the site to see whether they're falling under these infrastructure guidelines, and then you're able to work collaboratively, including if you are confirm. The first thing is to confirm that the guidelines apply. If they do, that you should have been issued a notice that says that your notice requirements under the contract in relation to claiming delays or claims in relation to the pause have been waived, but you certainly want to have ensured that you are part of the infrastructure guidelines before you just rely upon, oh, I don't need to make a claim yet, I'll make a claim later. So that's the key thing. If you are on a New South Wales government site, work up the line to work out what that you are falling under the guidelines. And if you're a head contractor, talk to your subcontractor about how they're going to get their claims in. And if you're a subcontractor, talk to your head contractor about how that head contractor wants their claims to be submitted. And if you're anywhere in the supply chain, you're able to go directly to Infrastructure New South Wales as well, and discuss those issues. So, and like Belle said, unfortunately, if you're not on those sites, those guidelines don't apply, and it's certainly a time to be looking in detail at your contract and what options there are. Want to run on to some time? It's obviously extensions of time, Belle?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess similar requirements to what we've mentioned in terms of payment claims. So people under government projects, New South Wales government projects, will have an entitlement for extra time. Go to the guidelines to work out how you claim those. People on non-government projects should be claiming those normally in accordance with your contract. And again, please look in particular to your statutory authorities or legislative requirements clauses. That will be the main source of this entitlement to claim extra time.
Yeah, great. I think that's we're here. So what can we do? We have done that. Obviously, the orders that came out were that the work can commence again on the 31st of July. That is obviously subject to those requirements. The head level one being that that COVID plan. From the 28th, or from yesterday, you were able to get on site and undertake that urgent work, which you've still been able to do so, and also be able to undertake some preparatory work. So that's about notifying your employees, your contractors and subcontractors what the program is for when you're getting back to work. But the big one is now really is about sitting down, working through that COVID safe plan for all of your sites, working out how you can comply, work out if you cannot comply, what you need to do to be able to comply. That may mean change of work methods or structuring or programming. And then to be able to get your claims in for costs and time. So that's really what I would recommend those that are not on site right now, or even if they are, they spend the next couple of days certainly looking at in detail. And if you've got any questions on those, then of course, just please reach out. So we do have a couple more questions, and I've got heading into the question slide. I've got a couple here from Tony, and also from Kim in relation to the affected local government areas and non-affected local government areas. And the first one is, if you have an unoccupied build site on the Central Coast, but you have clients in Sydney that want to come for a site visit, can they? The stay-at-home orders would apply in these circumstances, not the construction rules, in my view, Belinda, which means you would have to stay home unless it's for an essential reason. An essential reason wouldn't be to go and undertake a site visit on a construction site. Do you have a different view, Belle?
Yeah, I agree with that. So the site on the Central Coast will now be open if it can comply with the COVID safe plan, but it's not open in the same way as it was before. Everyone coming to site will have to comply with that plan, and that would include all the other public health orders. So for people who are just coming to visit for a non-essential reason, that would still be unlawful.
Yeah, and Kim's got one here, and it's not quite exactly the same on the construction sphere, but I've happened to glance through it when I was reading through the public health orders, and it's about moving residents from an affected LGA to a non-affected LGA. Again, this is not legal advice, but from memory, they've actually, they haven't, in relation to an authorised worker, which is someone that can leave that LGA, they have said that removalists are not authorised workers. So on that basis, moving house, I would say probably wouldn't be an essential reason for you to be able to leave. But that's a very interesting situation in terms where, if your lease is running out or something like that, I don't know how that would work. So unfortunately, Kim, I don't have an exact answer. I know there's some issues there in relation to workers and removalists, and they're unable to do it. But in terms of moving from an LGA, moving to a non-affected LGA and then starting work. I just don't have a concrete answer on that one. Belinda, have you got any wisdom on that one?
Nothing that's definite. I think that there is an exception for moving house. I think that you are able to move house in some circumstances, but in terms of then moving into an unrestricted LGA and then being able to work, obviously you're subject to all of the usual requirements. And the other issue you'd have to be mindful of is people visiting. There's two things, I guess, here. People in the restricted LGAs now have to have COVID tests every 3 days. So you would have to comply with that regime. If you are coming from Sydney or an unrestricted LGA to another area, I think you have to now show that you've had a test within the last 7 days before you can enter any premises. So just keep up to date with those testing requirements.
Yeah, and they're obviously changing very rapidly. So I think that's certainly an interesting question, Kim, and unfortunately we don't have a confirmed answer for you. Tony's got a last one here, which is it possible to split our trades on an unoccupied residential site into internal and external zones, so therefore we are able to have 2 trades on site at the one time following the COVID restrictions?
Do you want me to take that one? Are you frozen, H?
Nope, I'm good.
You're good. So I would say, yes, Tony, it's possible. If we're talking about an unoccupied residential site, the requirement is overall no more than 2 people inside and no more than 5 people outside. How you break that up within your trades is up to you.
Oh, I think that's for an occupied site, Belle. Yeah.
Even an unoccupied residential site, though,
Well, I think if we're looking at it, it depends. I think an unoccupied residential site, and again, these are fast-moving acts, but the way that I read it was an occupied residential site would be somewhere where you've already got an occupation certificate and someone is living there. Whereas an unoccupied residential site, I would say, would be, for example, if you're building a new home, you would just need to comply with your COVID safe plans.
So you think no limit of 2 inside, 5 outside? Can we come back to everybody with that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's the only answer that we've got. That's the only question that we've currently got. If anyone else has got any questions, Belinda and I will hang around another 5 minutes or so, and please just pop them into the Q&A above. Otherwise, look, thanks for joining us, and of course, if you've got any questions, just please reach out to Belinda or I or anyone in the team. Okay, thank you, and have a great day.
Oh, hi, Rach. Thank you. There's a question, H. Do you want to have a go?
Okay, cool. Yep. Hey, Rach. Can we still undertake defect inspections with council in the restricted LGA? It is a civil site. Some parts are open to the public, so technically aren't a construction site. Well, all construction sites within the restricted LGA are closed. And
that includes civil.
That includes civil work, includes unoccupied sites, includes everything there, Matt. So I think the answer is no on that one. Tony, no, unfortunately, it doesn't change anything if you're vaccinated. I don't know what the public health advice will be on that when it does come. So, don't know on that one. Sorry, mate. All right, Tony, appreciate your questions, and we will come back to you shortly with an answer on that. Belinda and I might just debate it for the next 10 hours, so it might be a while.
I've been looking. I actually can't find a definitive answer, so I'll defer to you, H.
Oh, no, that's no good. I was hoping I was wrong. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for popping in. If there are any more questions, we'll keep hanging around for a little bit more. to our live blog. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. There doesn't look like there's any more open questions. So hope everyone has a great day. And of course, stay safe, comply with the health orders, and we'll be in touch shortly. Okay. Bye.